What's up, guys? It is Dr. Seth, and we are back for another round of answering your questions from my Instagram AMA on YouTube. This is way more freaking fun for me to do these on YouTube because I can be a little more personable and I can go way further in depth on them than I could in an Instagram story. So let's run with it. And before I get to the first question, I'm going to say that this first question is one thing that Alex Hormozi is flat out completely wrong on. And see, now I get to have a clickbait title. So first question is, what shoes are those? And that is in reference to the shoes that I was wearing when I posted the Instagram AMA. And the reason I'm saying Alex Hormozi is wrong is he wears those silly little water shoe sandal thingies, when in fact these are the greatest wear anywhere, do anything in it shoe of all time. And these are the Keen Hauser 3. They're only $75 on Amazon in Canadian dollars, so they are not very expensive at all. They are phenomenally comfortable, like the most comfortable thing I have ever slipped my foot into in my entire freaking life. They work great everywhere. I can wear these for training on basically any movement that isn't a squat or deadlift. I've even been benching on these, and the traction on the floor is freaking insane. I can wear these in the Canadian winter on snow and ice and not slip on my ass. They're nice and warm in the winter, and they aren't overly hot in the summer. They're nice and comfy. My feet don't get sweaty. They have this big, juicy, fat toe box that fits my gigantic feet that have been mangled by barefoot shoes. I'll get more to that on questions 2 and 3, but these are overall fantastic. I would 100% recommend them to anyone, and the absolute biggest benefit is there are no laces to be seen, so I can just slip them on, don't gotta bend over and tie up my shoes, because who the hell has time to tie up their shoes nowadays? And I'm also a grown-up, so I can't wear Velcro anymore. But overall, these things are freaking phenomenal. And that bridges us into the next 2 questions, which go hand in hand, so I'm going to answer them as kind of one. But first of the 2 questions that make up question 2, is there any advantage to zero-drop shoes versus using classics like Vans or Chucks? And thoughts, opinions, and recommendations about barefoot shoes. As I mentioned, I am someone who bought into the barefoot shoe bandwagon a number of years ago. I was told that all of my knee problems, all of my hip problems were caused by footwear that was squishy and that was crunching up my foot. I changed out the barefoot shoes, my feet started to splay, my feet started to look different, they got a hell of a lot wider, my toes stretched out, all this fancy shit happened, but what was going on at my knee, what was going on at my hip, did not change at all. And in order to make changes at my knee and hip, it wasn't just as simple as putting on a Band-Aid wide toe box zero drop shoe. I actually had to train my knees and hips so they got better. And like, barefoot shoes do have theoretical advantages. We can potentially get better ground contact. We can potentially get better foot splay. We can potentially like transfer force differently through the foot than we could if we were wearing a shoe that was more crunched up and a shoe that is more squishy. But what we need to realize is that having a foot that is more compressed, is more locked in, is more padded, isn't directly causing your problems up chain. Your problems up chain are caused by like inadequate training up chain, and we can't address that up chain. Now, can our footwear have an impact on how we do things in the gym? Absolutely, but I don't think that the shoes that we wear in training need to be barefoot style by any means. The shoes that you wear in training need to, number 1, fit your foot, and if you're someone with a skinny ass foot, a wide toe box might not be helping you. Number 2, they need to allow for adequate force transfer to the ground. And in the case of like comparing like a barefoot shoe to a Vans to a Chuck, though a Vans or a Chuck, they're going to have minimal padding. You're going to be able to push to the ground. You're not going to have squish and slip and all that jazz of foot rolling around on the shoe. But if you are in a runner, transitioning to something that is going to allow you to not have any squish or any weirdness is going to allow for better performance in the gym. And if you guys go back to my review of the TYR Olympic lifting shoe, I really did not like those at all for training because the forefoot is squishy. And yes, it is like a barefoot, wider toe box style Olympic lifting shoe, but the advantage that it would have played by fitting my wide foot better, it was totally taken away by the fact that the forefoot squished and I couldn't transfer force into the floor as well as I could in my Reebok Legacy lifters that didn't fit as well, but because I could transfer force better into the floor, absolutely like the Reebok Legacy lifters were a much better call for me, and that is why I'm no longer wearing the TYRs. I gave them away to my dad because he's not lifting enough weight that it really matters with a little bit of squish, and I am back to being a happy camper inside of the Reeboks. So big picture on barefoot shoes, if you are someone with a wide foot, they can be a good option, but bottom line, you just need something that's going to allow you to transfer force to the ground well, and a Vans, a Chuck can be a good option if you are someone whose foot fits in them well. I am not, because the barefoot shoes made my feet nice and fat after many years in them, so I am stuck with things with wide toe boxes, but these, it means it's not the worst thing in the world because these are freaking sick, and I'm not sponsored by Keen in any way, but consider this my sponsorship application. So, on to question technically 3, but even though 4, technically 4. Yeah, technically 4, but question 2 because all of the first 3 went together. So, any tips for transitioning to wraps from knee sleeves? And the big one is going to be, number 1, practice getting wrapped a lot. Number 2, put the wraps on earlier than you think you need to have them on. A lot of new lifters or new to wraps lifters, I made this mistake and ate shit because of it when I first went into knee wraps, is that I put the wraps on too late in my first training session in them. Like, I worked up to something heavy in sleeves, and then I went heavier and put wraps on thinking that it would just be this magical, easy peasy spring out of the hole. And no, because I had no idea how to use the wraps, I ended up dumping the bar over my head because they just pushed me around. I couldn't hit the hole. I wasn't used to the amount of compression. I didn't know how to push into them. And if I had put wraps on at 405 instead of 585, I probably would have had a much better time in them. So if you are brand new to wraps, put them on early in your session. Get a chance to feel what they feel like before there is a real weight on the bar. You could even put them on like as early as like 50% of your planned work set of the day, just to give you lots of opportunities to get used to it, get used to the feel, get used to the compression, get used to pushing into them. And that's going to be tip number 2, is the most important thing if we're going to get pounds out of wraps, is we need to actually push into them. The wraps are going to try to compress your knee and prevent your knee from bending, right? So if we want to get pounds out of them, we need to go into that resistance, so that resistance is going to push us back out. Another mistake that new to wrap lifters make is they avoid the pinch, they avoid the squish, they avoid the discomfort. They end up sitting back further instead of pushing forward into the wrap, and therefore they aren't going to get shit all out of them because they're modifying their squat technique away from where they're strong, and they're modifying squat technique away from where the wrap is going to create the most tension. So make sure that you get them on early so you're giving yourself a chance to get used to them. Make sure that you're pushing into them so you're actually getting pounds out of them. And in terms of shaping up a training cycle for a lifter their first time in wraps, I would start as early as like 12 or 16 weeks out. Don't push the wrap training hard, but just push it hard enough to get an idea of what you're doing. And then as you ramp up closer to the meet, you can start pushing the wraps harder and make them your main movement at, 10 weeks out, 8 weeks out, and then you can ride it all the way up through the peak. Just make sure you're getting started early enough in them in both the session and the training cycle, and that is going to give you the best chance at doing well with the wraps on. So the next question, I'm not even going to say what number this is because at this point I can't keep track of the math in my head, but what is the best exercise for the lower back? And what this really comes down to is, instead of saying what is the best exercise, what is going to be the best exercise for where your low back is? And for someone like my training partner Darrell, who is ridiculously strong, pulls 900, drug tested, and is just ridiculous, the best low back exercise for him might not be the best low back exercise for someone who is at the beginning stages of rehab. If you can't do anything with your back, you're going to have to start pretty slow. You're going to have to start pretty cautious so that we can gradually expand ability. So starting with things like McGill protocol, starting with things like an active cat-cow where we're flexing the abs to pull into flexion, flexing the erectors to push into extension very gently, very gradually, those could be very, very, very good start points. If you are someone who is strong like Darrell, who has a very, very, very durable spine because he built it up to be durable, something like a round back stiff leg can be a good option to really make you strong at overcoming flexion. And there are a lot of things we can put in the middle between the cat-cow and a round back stiff leg. We can do things like a back raise, we can do things like a reverse hyper, we can do things like a seated cable good morning, we can do things like standing abs to get better at pulling into flexion. It's not just a matter of what is the best exercise, it is the matter of what is going to be the best exercise that can allow you to push forward. If you start with something that's too gnarly for your back, you're going to be putting yourself at risk, because if it's too gnarly for your back might not be able to handle it. And I'm talking too fast, starting to mutter like Elmer Fudd. But what we need to do is just figure out where you are with your back, and then figure out an exercise that matches your abilities, that we can progress, and that we can expand to harder and harder movements. And spoiler alert, I do have another video in the works that's going to be dropping Friday that's going to be going over good introduction exercises to get lifters started with training spinal flexion, so make sure to check that one out when it drops. On to the next question. Wife's traps immediately take over back and shoulder movement, painfully pumped up. So the first question I'm going to ask in response to your question is it really that big of a problem to have a wife with jacked traps? Second question is going to be why? And most often, if we have a lifter who's like shrugging up all their rows, trying to shrug up any shoulder pressing, they usually lack ability in anchoring the scaps through depression, through protraction, and they're trying to fight for stability to anchor down by using the traps and by kind of shrugging up and back. And if they are doing that, the solution to the problem is going to be building up control and building up ability in creating scapular depression, in creating scapular protraction. We're going to be trying to train the low traps. We're going to be trying to train the serratus anterior so that we can help create more stability and then take some of that stability demand away from the traps, away from the shrugging up stuff. And easy ways that we can start doing that is just going to be segmenting any upper back work that we do at the very beginning. Now, there's people that's going to say that this is stupid because that is not the pattern that we want to demonstrate when we're actually moving the arms in space. But if we segment upper back movement, and what I mean by that is if we're doing a row, if we start the row by trying to set scaps down, then pull, that can allow us to have an easier time at not shrugging up. Same thing with pull downs. If we set the scap down first, then pull down, that can make sure that we're not riding up. You will likely have to use less weight at the very beginning of this to make sure that we are not kind of cheating away from the intent that we're trying to accomplish. And once you establish control, once you establish a sense of actually being able to do it, we can move towards more fluid pulling, and we should be able to just set the scap down and pull. Set the scap down and pull, make it fluid, make it lat dominant, make it not all shruggy uppy. Now, if that doesn't do the trick and they're not able to find it at first, we can go to more basic scap training. And like the easiest place to start will be just doing a scap car, controlled articular rotation. And in this, we're going to start by shrugging up, we're going to pull back, we're going to pull down, and then we're going to push forward while keeping it down. And we're just going to do circles like this, trying to create as much tension as we can the whole way around. If we get really good at this, we can progress it to loading with a band, so we have to pull down and forward against that band. We can do scap push-ups to get more serratus in there, and we could even do like scap-only pull-ups where we're just setting scap down, and that should help get the serratus end of things going. If that still doesn't do the trick, something else I like to do is to do a scap-only Y-raise. So we're going to be face down on an incline bench. We are going to get myself in frame. We're then going to try to shrug down and pull the scap down and back to make a Y, and we're going to want to stop the movement just before the delts kick in, and that's going to be really, really, really gnarly in the low back. You want to kind of feel it down low on the shoulder blades, kind of in between them, and that should do the trick on kind of getting things going. So start out by segmenting upper back work where we're setting scaps down first, then pulling. That'll kind of make sure we're putting it in the right spot and avoiding that kind of shrug up nastiness that's going on. Step 2 is going to be training scapular motion so we can get better at having that downward stability so we're not getting into that jacked up position. And on to the last question of the day. Knees or maybe hips are uneven at the bottom of a squat. Sometimes my hips shift sideways. Normal, fix. So if we are shifting on a squat, the one time I'm going to be really worried about it is if it is getting in the way of putting pounds on the bar. If your shift is causing like a catastrophic miss, if your shift is getting in the way of being able to express strength, then I'm going to be worried about it. If the shift is just kind of happening, it's there, it's not getting in the way of progression, it's not getting in the way of training, I'm going to be less worried about it. And everyone on the internet is so worried about imbalance. And what we got to realize about humans is that we are inherently asymmetrical. The fact that you are right-handed or left-handed is going to change the amount of loading that one side of your body does versus the other through your entire life. The fact that you're right-handed or left-handed is going to mean that doing more work with that one side of the body is probably going to make that side of the body a little bit stronger. And because of that, we are going to be biased to one side more than the other. And when we have those biases going into a movement that should look square, they're going to show by some degree of shifting. And is that going to happen to everyone? No, there are people who do squat perfectly even, and that is perfectly fine. But if we do have some degree of shift, it's usually not worth panicking over. Now, if you are someone who has a shift and is in pain, yes, a shift can bias loading to one side of the body versus the other, but what it comes down to isn't the shift, it is load management. And the shift can then predispose us to overloading one side, but The problem is the overload in general, not the overload caused by the shift. And if we were to manage loading better through training, we're going to be able to get over that. And if we are fixing issues related to pain, oftentimes it's going to improve the shift, but the shift isn't going to be as much of a cause as it is a symptom that's going to go away as we bring up tolerance and make the pain stuff get out of there. So in general, I'm not super worried about shifts just because asymmetry is part of being human. Asymmetry is part of having, a liver over here, a stomach over here, all that jazz. Like, we're not symmetrical. So people would be way better off if we stopped obsessing over it, let the body go where it goes. And as long as things are getting better, as long as things are progressing, as long as we are managing loading well, a shift shouldn't cause you problems long term. And if you are getting problems related to a shift, it just comes back to the big load management picture. And if we obsess over the shift and we don't fix the load management, the problem is just going to come back in the future once we get stronger. So guys, that is it for questions today. Thank you so freaking much to everyone who asked. If I didn't get to your question, it's likely that I've already covered it in depth in another video, so scroll through the channel, take a look, and you should be able to find a pretty solid answer for what you have going on. And if you want to go more in depth to conjugate specific stuff, I know this video didn't touch on it that much, but I do have the upcoming lecture on making conjugate work for raw powerlifting, where we're going to go through the ins and outs to actually make conjugate work for raw lifting, because I firmly believe that it is the best way to train, and that comes down to how adaptable it is for every individual who is doing it, and we're going to get into how to adapt it to every individual who's doing it. So make sure to check that out. It is going to be some heavy learning, but you will undoubtedly become a better coach and lifter if you take part in it.